Welcome back to another edition of Church and State with Chris Ferrara and Brian McCall. Each episode, we talk about what's going on both in the church and the state. And why do we do that? They're the two perfect societies, the two complete societies that are govern the world, right? The church for the spiritual, and then the civil society, each nation for the temporal, the natural order. And as popes have told us, they are supposed to work in harmony and in cooperation. But when they are separated, as Leo the 13th told us, it is like separating the soul from the body. And we live in a world where the church and state have, been separated by law, although often on the same page when it comes to the modern issues. So this week we've got two stories. One that's being hailed by the media as a great event, a great reconciliation. King Charles, the head of the church in England, the heretical schismatic church, went and paid a state visit to Pope Leo, and they held an ecumenical hootenanny in the Sistine Chapel with English Anglican choir, Catholic choir. They prayed together. Oh, it was all warm and fuzzy. You can't have any problems with warm and fuzzy, can you, Chris?
That's ecumenism, the warm and fuzzy feeling. It's warm and fuzzy feelings for the past 60 years as the Protestant sects deteriorate and descend into an abyss of total depravity. And we keep hailing the greater and greater unity that we enjoy with people who are less and less unified with us. Of course, on our end of the process, the average Catholic in the pew has become Protestantized. So if you look at public opinion polls, there's very little difference between Catholic opinion on issues of marriage appropriation and Protestant opinion. So there's been an adequation, if you will, between Protestantism and Catholicism. We reached an equilibrium point thanks to the ecumenical venture, which is nothing other than an affirmation of Protestants in their errors. The same process we see with Francis's, the former pope's accompaniment, which is nothing other than a word for tolerating what the church formerly considered intolerable. So this is the end result of ecumenism. The total apostasy of these Protestant sects, whatever remained of Christianity in them, has dissipated, at least in terms of the mainline denominations.
Well, I mean, who could have a problem with people praying together? I mean, weren't those martyrs who refused to pray with the Anglican Protestants, weren't they just too uptight? I mean, if everybody's praying together, isn't that a good thing?
It's phony atmospherics. They have the king of England, the so-called head of the Church of England, pro-abortion politician. That's all he really is. And they just elected a female primate of the Church of England, prompting the immediate withdrawal from the Anglican communion of 40 million of the more conservative Anglicans, who are ripe, I suppose, for entry into the special ordinariate that Pope Benedict set up. Maybe that's the inadvertent consequence of ecumenism. They've driven people from the mainline denominations who were horrified by what's happening to them into the Catholic Church. And the Anglican Ordinariate is a fine example of that. So in spite of itself, ecumenism may in one sense be succeeding.
Yeah, that's an unintended consequence, I guess. Well, I mean, you point that out. I mean, essentially, they're in the midst of an Anglican schism right now. They've just, they've seceded from the Anglican secession from the Catholic Church. Yeah. And maybe that's a lot of what this was. I mean, and since the Pope let himself be used by Charles to try to face save and, get some better press out about the Anglican Church. But the Anglican Church is really a joke. I mean, it's founded by somebody who wants to divorce his wife, so doesn't like the result he gets, so he founds his own church. And how can anything starting in that origin, with such an origin, be good?
Well, it's founded in murder too, the murder of St. Thomas.
Yes.
So, yeah. And so what we have here is a charade, a deliberate exercise now for almost 60 years in absolute fakery, a pretense that we're engaging in exercises that promote unity, when there's no unity at all. There's ever more radical disunity between these mainline sects and the Catholic Church. What remains of the church and her human element, although, of course, the church is essentially indefectible. And the irony here is that we now have with these evangelical Protestant denominations a total abhorrence of ecumenism. They want nothing to do with it.
Mm.
And they look with horror upon the Catholic Church, again, we're speaking of a human element, as an ultra-liberal denomination, no better in their eyes than the Anglicans.
Yes.
That's how absurd the situation has become. We have more in common now doctrinally with certain evangelical Protestants than we did with the last pope, apparently.
Wow, that's not strange.
There are actually some Protestant evangelical denominations that still reject divorce, for example.
Yes, that's
Not
true.
exception. Far as in between, but that's the end result. The whole ecumenical venture was doomed to failure. It was a total fraud from the beginning, and the fraud becomes more ludicrous with each passing year. But they double down on it and triple down on it. They keep going down the same ridiculous dead end as if this is going to accomplish anything other than making the church look ridiculous.
Mm. Well, and speaking of looking ridiculous, in addition to this meeting with the usurper of the rightful place of the church in England, today the Vatican issued a press release that there's more to come. Apparently, on October 28th, next week, they're going to mark the 60th anniversary of the Second Vatican Council's declaration Nostra Aetate, with a big event in the Paul VI Hall. Reading from their press release, leaders and representatives of Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Jairism, whatever that is, Sikhism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Confucianism, Taoism, Shintoism, and traditional African religions will gather together with members of the Roman Curia, the diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See, Catholic delegates engaged in interreligious dialogue, scholars, interreligious networks, and young people from around the world. The program will include music, personal testimonies, and cultural performances celebrating unity amongst diversity. And then there'll be a private time for private prayer together. I mean, this is a CC.
Another easy event.
Exactly.
You realize that you've enumerated as part of this festivity every religion from A to Z.
It's literally right.
Animism to Zoroastrianism.
Right.
Unbelievable. Well, it's the same insanity we've seen since the Second Vatican Council. And what's happening here is that the Catholic Church, again, we're speaking of the human elements, the disoriented, diabolically disoriented leaders of the church, to quote Sister Lucia, intent upon rendering the Catholic Church utterly and totally irrelevant. Why would anyone want to be a Catholic when the Catholic Church is now sending the message that whatever religion you have is a perfectly fine vehicle for your personal salvation? And all we really have now is various convictions of various types of believers. Like I was just taking a look at the ridiculous encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si, by Pope Francis, 85 pages, which reads like something from the Sierra Club. But there's one chapter inserted in the middle of it. I think it's chapter 6 or chapter 8, I forget which, about religion. And the introduction to that chapter is apologetic. Why should we include any talk about religion in a document addressed to all men of goodwill? Well, because the convictions of believers are important for dialogue with science. So that's all the church is in the minds of these fanatics. The church is nothing more than a facilitator of dialogue. And religion is nothing more than something for believers. And the believers have various convictions. And it doesn't matter what your convictions are, as long as they're sincere. And it really doesn't matter what religion you profess, as long as you profess some kind of religion. In fact, it doesn't matter whether you're an atheist. If you listen to what Francis said to Scalfari, his friend, in those many interviews, none of which he denied.
I mean, if you think of the irony of that paragraph, a Roman pontiff has to justify talking about religion.
Yeah, it explains that, we really have to say something about religion. And, by the way, if you read Laudato Si, what they say about religion is in many places quite classically formulated. There's a lot of pious and even beautiful language, and particularly about the Blessed Virgin or Assumption into heaven. It's all tacked onto this document, which totally undermines the religious part.
Right.
And the great irony of Laudato Si, another absurdity, we're veering off into that topic, is the great irony here of protecting the earth. We must protect the earth from who? From the people who have dominion over it,
Right.
according to God. And what will happen at the end of time to the earth? Well, St. Peter tells us the earth and all of its works will be burned up. God will destroy it all, give us a new heavens and a new earth. So this ball of rock, with all of its natural wonders, it is God's creation. It is beautiful, is ultimately a temporal and passing phase of human existence in salvation history. But if you read Laudato Si, you'll have no indication. And in the post-conciliar church in general, in their entire program, odd extra to the outside world, no indication whatsoever of our orientation to an eternal destiny in the realm of the blessed. That's no longer part of the Catholic program. They're not interested in that. They're interested in secular projects and making everybody feel good about themselves.
Yeah, that hasn't actually been too successful, given how many people are on antidepressants these days. They haven't made people feel good about themselves.
A direct function, by the way, of the withdrawal of Catholic influence from the body politic. We live in a therapeutic civilization, to quote Philip Reeve, the therapeutic society, because people don't have God in their lives, and they don't have God in their lives because the channels of grace that he established in the Catholic Church have been cut off from any integration with the body politic. And the result you have is a lot of miserable people drifting, lonely, desperate, ever increasing rates of suicide. Carl Jung once said, I might have mentioned this in a previous episode, that in his flourishing psychiatric practice, he never saw Catholics because they have confession. They can unburden their guilt, which is what drives most people into states of depression and even, self-destruction, suicide, outright suicide. They're guilty. They're not living the way they should live. Their lives have been ruined because but for the grace of God, all of us, they don't have the helps of the church. Where would we be without the grace of the sacraments? We'd be natural men, inclined to natural inclinations, always prey to falling into a state of grievous sin. That's why Christ established the church, not to have ecumenical gatherings and to talk about the environment,
Right.
the coral reefs and the worms and the insects. I'm mentioning this because I was just studying this ridiculous document because I'm trying to finish up this book on liberty, the second volume of it. And it struck me that this document is an exemplar of exactly what the church has become. What Francis said it mustn't be, but of course he always did what he said he wasn't doing.
Right.
NGO. The church is an NGO now.
Right.
Really,
well, as we've said in this program as well, every promise of liberalism has delivered its exact opposite, right? So more freedom is only delivered totalitarianism. And on that front, liberalism and has been promising for decades this panacea of peace. We're going to found all these NGOs, all these world organizations, and we're going to put an end to war. Liberalism's wars have been wars to end war, which always end in more war. And that's where we are in Europe. We're now coming up we're only a few months away from the 4th anniversary of the beginning of the war in the heart of Europe in Ukraine. And, Donald Trump seems to have done a lot that he could do to bring this war to an end. He had this big peace initiative in Alaska, but it just doesn't seem to happen. He seems to have made a little progress in the Middle East. He's ended or brought about at least some ceasefire there. But why do you think that this is eluding him? Why do you think that we just cannot seem to end this bloodbath in Ukraine?
Well, the situation in terms of territorial disputes seems to me unresolvable. Yeah, Putin wants the Donbass. He's certainly not going to give back Crimea. Donbass is majority Russian ethnic. If you had a referendum in the Donbass today, they probably would agree to come under the rule of the Kremlin as opposed to that little tin pot dictator in Kiev. So he's not giving back the Donbass. He's not going to return Crimea. And here we have Zelensky, the authoritarian, insisting that he wants the Donbass back and he wants Crimea back. He wants it all back. So the two sides are diametrically opposed and utterly irreconcilable, which reduces Trump to actually threatening Russia with Tomahawk missiles. That's a desperation move. I don't think he's ever going to actually authorize it, but it's a calculated bluff. So I don't see a resolution unless Zelensky is removed from office or has a quasi-miraculous change of mind. He's going to have to give up territory. And
But
it looks like it's going to be the Donbass.
but why doesn't Trump have leverage over him? I mean, if we've been funding this war, I mean, if we enrich them so much they don't need us anymore, why can't he just say you're cut off and you're going to get overrun and become part of Russia unless you agree to give up territory now?
That's exactly what he said during that famous confrontation in the White House when Zelensky was sitting there in his
his cargo shorts or whatever he was.
His cargo shirt.
Yeah.
He was wearing his military fatigues, and Trump was saying you're flirting with World War III. The only way out of this, if you want to use brute force to get a result, and it's probably going to be the only way to resolve it, is to cut off Zelensky. No more aid. They've lost the war. That's the issue. The issue is how long are we going to prolong the agony? If we could have had a peace deal 4 years ago in February, if the first year of the war began, but the United States and England scuttled the deal. It would have been what Putin wants now, which is basically the Eastern territories. He controls 90% of the Donbass. Crimea was taken, 2011? Obama did nothing about it.
Yeah.
And rightly so. It wasn't our business whether Crimea belongs to Russia or Kiev. So the only solution I see is ultimately telling Zelensky to pound sand.
But, so what's holding Trump back? Is the neocon foreign policy establishment that strong? That
I don't think Trump is devoid of respect for public opinion, much less so than other politicians, but it's still a break on what he's willing to do. Mm-hmm. He was much more frank about this earlier in his presidency when he said to Zelensky, it's over, you've lost.
Yeah.
And if you keep this up, you're flirting with World War III. Well, now he's so desperate. Trump is so desperate to make a deal that he's, engaging in bluffs. He's bluffing. It's a poker game. I don't know how it's going to end. I don't see any solution that doesn't involve major concessions in terms of territory that Zelensky claims he's totally unwilling to make. He also says the Ukrainian constitution doesn't allow for territorial concessions. I don't know how this will end. I'm pretty alarmed, actually. This looks eerily like the beginning of World War I to me.
In what sense?
A guarantee to countries that didn't need our guarantee or our protection, which were none of our business, and then the escalating pressure for war, and then finally all-out war, in which everybody participated. And the end result was everybody was left pretty much where they were when the conflict started, except Germany was declared the winner, and they dismembered Germany and redrew the map of Europe.
Right.
Giving rise to Hitler, we know the story.
Yes.
So to me, it's either a world war or at the very least a huge European theater conflict, or Zelensky is removed or suddenly decides that he better give up some territory, the territory in question.
Well, and you hit on an issue there that Trump has alluded to but hasn't mentioned recently. This guy has been in power and his term has expired, and he's just said we can't have elections. So is that like a common thing in history? Whenever there was a war, you just cancel elections? I guess that's what England did through World War I, World War II. America, we didn't have any elections during those wars because you just can't have an election when you're fighting a war, right?
He cites the Ukrainian constitution that during times of war, there cannot be any elections. But I think there's going to have to be at some point an internationally supervised election, and he's going to have to be removed from office. And this is a typical leader of the secular nation state, presides over disaster, presides over these horrific wars, which are poor men's wars. All the poor men are sent to die in the meat grinder, and then they'll walk away unscathed. They'll probably retire in a villa somewhere off the coast of on the coast of France or the coast of Italy or some other luxurious European location. There's no doubt he's got many millions of dollars in offshore accounts.
Well, I mean, we knew about the corruption in the country years ago. The former president's son had his hand in that cookie jar.
Yeah, and now we know for a fact that Biden intervened to remove the prosecutor investigating his son's dealings with Burisma. An established fact. So, is there a way out of this morass? I don't see it right now. I can't imagine how Trump is going to pull this off.
Mm. I mean, what should be the Europeans' attitude towards the Russians? There does seem to be underlying all of this just sort of a visceral detestation of Russians for being Russians and sort of that they should be our natural enemy.
But they don't believe that. This is just the usual scenario where we need the other, the boogeyman, when in fact, Russia is still a major trading party with the EU in terms of energy sources. In fact, the EU is funding Putin's war machine and refuses to stop purchasing oil and natural gas from Russia. So this is the problem we have is the hypocrisy of these liberal elites. Again, they're going to send the common man into the meat grinders that are the results of their diplomatic blunders.
Mhm.
And the leaders walk away unscathed. Same thing happened in America with the Civil War. The leaders of that conflict walked away unscathed, and 700,000 people died.
Well,
So
it is just always the common man who ends up paying the price, for these megalomaniacs.
there was a film I saw not too long ago of an 18 or 19-year-old lad being dragged into a car for forcible conscription while his mother is screaming. And the poor guy is spreading his legs apart, trying to keep himself from being pulled into the car door. And you ultimately yank him into the car and drive him away to his very probable death for nothing.
Mm.
This is exactly what Elon Musk said. Why is this war being fought? We're going to end up back where we started. It's going to be territorial concessions. It will all be for nothing.
Yeah. And again, it's the empty promises of liberalism, right? Since liberalism's ascendancy, the world has been involved in more wars. There's been more suffering around the world than the medievals ever could have imagined, given the suffering those people killed in the 20th century through wars and political persecution.
Well, the wars of Christendom involved private armies raised by the king. Only with the French Revolution did we see for the first time levée en masse, so universal conscription.
Mm.
Everyone must fight in the people's war. And then we had the war effort, entire nations engaged in a war effort. Wars were, they were bloody, of course, but they were essentially private affairs, nothing like the casualties we see in modern warfare. And it isn't just the weaponry, it's the fact that entire nations were embroiled in war through universal conscription.
Mm.
And this idea of a nation state going to war with another nation state, as opposed to one king fighting with another king over territory.
Mm. Well, as I said, is really not delivered on any of his promises, but people still vote. Still, it amazes me. There's people who still vote for these empty promises.
Well, Trump is, in my lifetime, the one who's come closest to actually fulfilling most of what he promised. But when it comes to Ukraine, I just don't see a solution at this point,
Well,
other than the one that was proffered at the beginning of the war, which we're going to end up with sooner or later. And the only issue is, do we have to have a world war to get there?
well, hopefully not. Hopefully not. Well, there you have it. The empty promises of ecumenism and modern political leaders, but leaves us with war and sentimental nonsense about all religions being the same. But maybe next time we'll see what happens at this October 28th, a CC reboot 5.0 or whatever it is at this point, and talk about it then. Well, thanks for your time, Chris, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Till then.